The digital server was already recording his movements before the wire was ever pulled. I urge you to subscribe to the channel right now as we begin to reconstruct the terrifying truth. The propped rear doors act as a glaring physical misdirection, challenging the detectives to map a route that reconciles the damage at the main entrance with the silent vulnerability at the back. It suggests a scenario where the perimeter was not just breached, but systematically dismantled from multiple angles. The sheer audacity required to compromise both the front and the back of a large suburban property speaks to a level of extreme confidence. The suspect was not rushing. The suspect was controlling the entire environmental footprint of the residence. As forensic teams meticulously processed the interior pathways connecting those two compromise points, they began to realize the true horror of what the open back doors represented. They were not an exit left carelessly ajar in a panic. They were a deliberate physical modification of the environment designed to facilitate a specific operational goal. The open doors point to a calculated strategy of movement within the private sanctuary of the victim. This revelation deepens the mystery exponentially. It forces everyone to abandon the simplistic idea of a tragic mistake at the threshold and confront the terrifying possibility of a multi-staged assault. About the front door evidence and the residual data that the suspected predator failed to erase. The contradiction between the violence at the front and the silent breach at the back becomes the critical axis upon which the entire case turns. Please let me know your thoughts on this spatial contradiction, because understanding the layout is absolutely vital to unlocking the truth of that night. The realization that the rear of the house was intentionally left open sets the stage for a forensic reconstruction that will completely shatter your understanding of how this crime was actually executed. The physical evidence is demanding a new narrative, one that connects the blood on the concrete with the desert wind blowing through the propped open doors. The answer to this impossible puzzle lies in reversing our perspective on the entire sequence of events. The sheer vastness of the residential layout meant that moving from the rear patio to the main foyer required navigating a complex interior geography. The intruder had to traverse hallways, bypass potential secondary alarms, and maintain absolute silence while the homeowner slept. The prop doors suggest an arrogant comfort level with the environment. It is as if the suspect wanted to ensure an unobstructed pathway, perhaps anticipating the need to. The security of a home is often measured by the strength of its front door, but for those living, move quickly or carry a heavy burden without having to fumble with latches or handles in the dark. This level of premeditation transforms the scene from a random burglary into a highly specialized operation. The open rear access point is the silent, smoking gun that proves the public narrative is entirely backward. We must stop looking at the front step as the beginning of the nightmare and start looking at the dark perimeter of the backyard. The predator did not announce their presence under the glare of a security light. They slipped through the unseen vulnerabilities of the property, using the shadows of the foothills to mask a devastating infiltration. The prop doors are the silent testimony of a phantom who had already won the tactical battle before the victim even knew she was in danger. The agonizing contradiction between the two entryways finally collapses into a singular devastating realization when investigators apply the principles of an ambush to the forensic timeline. The brutal truth of the physical evidence completely obliterates the myth of a voluntary encounter. The suspected predator did not walk up the driveway, press a button, and wait for an elderly woman to greet him. In the Catalina Foothills that night, the real danger was already being calculated in the silence. The front porch was not the point of infiltration. It was the point of extraction. The propped open rear doors provide the exact trajectory of the infiltration. The attacker used the cover of the desert night to bypass the heavily monitored street-facing zones. He compromised the vulnerable rear of the property, slipping into the quiet sanctuary while the homeowner was completely oblivious to the breach. The chilling reality is that the victim was already trapped inside her own home before any alarms could ever be raised. She was most likely ambushed in her sleep or taken completely by surprise in a space where her guard was entirely dropped. This internal capture scenario perfectly explains why no neighbors heard screams or signs of a struggle prior to the critical moment. The terror unfolded in the insulated silence of the interior rooms. But an abduction requires removing the victim from the premises, and this is where the sequence of the front porch evidence finally makes horrifying sense. The dark stain on the concrete does not represent an attacker trying to get inside. At exactly 9:50 on the night of January 31st, Nancy Guthrie was dropped off at her residence by her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. It represents the violent struggle of a victim being forcefully dragged outside against her will. The suspected kidnapper, having already secured his target via the rear infiltration, utilized the primary exit for his escape route. As he forced her over the threshold, the violent reality of the abduction left its permanent biological mark on the concrete. This exit strategy explains the exact timing of the technological sabotage. The lens was not disabled to hide an arrival. It was violently disconnected to cover a departure. As the suspect dragged the victim out the main entrance, he reached up and tore the device from its housing to prevent the system from capturing the vehicle or the direction of their flight. The lingering digital image of the armed man was the final split second before the hardware was destroyed during the active extraction. This forensic reconstruction paints a picture of extreme psychological terror. He watched her go inside, ensuring the lights were on and the perimeter was settled before he drove away. The victim did not make a fatal error in judgment by unlatching her deadbolt for a stranger. She did absolutely nothing wrong. She locked her home, activated her defenses, and went to sleep exactly as she had done for years. The terrifying verdict of the crime scene is that she was hunted by an adversary who knew exactly how to circumvent standard residential defenses. The realization that the attack originated from the deep interior of the house and violently erupted out onto the front step is the most chilling aspect of the entire file. It means the perceived safety of a locked front gate is a complete illusion if the rear perimeter is left vulnerable to a dedicated threat. The blood at the threshold is the tragic signature of a woman fighting for her life as she was pulled away from the only safe place she knew. The prop doors at the back and the shattered technology at the front are the physical bookends of a meticulously executed nightmare. This was a zero visibility operation until the very last second when the violence spilled out into the open. This was the final time any member of her family would see her in a state of safety. Air just long enough to leave a stain and a single haunting digital frame before vanishing into the night? The coordinated nature of moving a person out the front while leaving the back wide open suggests a terrifying level of situational control. The suspect orchestrated the entire flow of the crime, dictating exactly where the struggle would occur and precisely what evidence would be left behind. Please ensure you have notifications turned on as we continue to track the forensic manhunt for the individual who engineered this silent nightmare. The realization that the front door was the final tragic exit completely rewrites the emotional core of this case. It transitions the narrative from a cautionary tale about trusting strangers into a stark, terrifying warning about the vulnerabilities hidden within the architecture of our own homes. The predator utilized the physical layout of the property as a weapon, turning the secure walls into a trap. By controlling the rear entry, the attacker ensured that any attempt to flee would force the victim toward the front, where the final violent extraction was already planned. The shattered camera and the stained concrete are the ultimate proof of a calculated ambush that weaponized the very concept of sanctuary. For an 84-year-old woman living alone, her routine was her armor. The forensic puzzle of the physical threshold has been comprehensively solved, but the identity of the phantom who crossed it remains agonizingly out of reach. The revelation of the ambush angle brings a cold clarity to the sequence of events, but it does not bring the victim back, nor does it place handcuffs on the suspected predator. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and local law enforcement agencies are now locked in a relentless high-stakes manhunt. They are no longer deciphering a crime scene, they are hunting a highly capable fugitive who demonstrated an alarming proficiency in residential infiltration. The recovered digital footprint showing the tactical gear is the primary catalyst for a massive intelligence gathering operation. Agents are scouring purchase records, cross-referencing tactical equipment registries, and analyzing regional communication grids in a desperate bid to attach a name to the masked figure. But tracking an individual who possesses the discipline to execute such a clean extraction is a monumental challenge. The suspect understood operational security and left an incredibly sparse physical trail beyond the immediate area of the struggle. The family of the victim is trapped in an excruciating limbo. She was a woman of deep habit who meticulously locked her doors and engaged her security systems every single night without exception. The false internet narratives blaming their mother for opening the door have been dismantled by the hard forensic truth. But the vindication offers zero comfort, while the perpetrator remains free. They are forced to endure the daily torment of an open, active investigation where every passing hour diminishes the statistical probability of a safe recovery. The authorities are tightly controlling the release of any further trace evidence to protect the integrity of the ongoing search. They know that the suspect is likely monitoring the media coverage, adapting their evasion tactics based on what the public knows. This creates a tense environment where the investigators must operate in absolute silence while the community demands immediate answers. The physical architecture of the house has yielded all its secrets, and the digital servers have surrendered their hidden files. The case now transitions from a forensic examination of a structure to a sprawling geographical dragnet. The focus shifts to the vast desert highways, the hidden secondary routes in the dark corners of the state where a fugitive might seek refuge. The lingering question that haunts the detectives is whether this was a highly targeted personal This predictability was not just a personality trait, it was a survival strategy in a quiet desert community. Vendetta, or the work of a sophisticated predator selecting a vulnerable target of opportunity. Identifying the motive is often the key to identifying the suspect, but the absolute silence of the perpetrator leaves a chilling void. The manhunt relies on the hope that the suspect will eventually make a mistake, that the pressure of the national spotlight will force an error in judgment. The authorities are waiting for a stolen credit card to be used a vehicle, to be spotted on a traffic camera, or a piece of tactical gear to be pawned. Until that single thread unravels, the masked individual remains a terrifying abstraction. The physical truth of the breached doors is established, but the human truth of who orchestrated this nightmare is still buried in the shadows. The community is left to grapple with the reality that a highly organized threat successfully operated within their borders and vanished without a trace. The doors have been analyzed, the blood's been tested, but the phantom with the tactical gear is still out there. The grueling nature of this manhunt exacts a heavy toll on the dedicated detectives assigned to the task force. At exactly 1:47 in the morning, a high-definition lens captured a fleeting nightmare, a masked, yet there was a hidden tension in this absolute routine. They are sifting through thousands of unverified tips and chasing down leads that often evaporate into nothing. The sheer volume of data generated by a high-profile case can be overwhelming, and the challenge is separating the signal from the massive amount of noise. Every dead end increases the agonizing pressure felt by the investigative team. They are acutely aware that the timeline is their greatest enemy. The longer the suspect remains unidentified, the colder the trail becomes. The resolution of this terrifying home invasion is entirely dependent on closing the gap between the forensic reality of the crime scene and the hidden identity of the perpetrator. What this case teaches us about the anatomy of modern home invasions is profoundly disturbing and demands a complete reevaluation of residential security protocols. The public often falls victim to the illusion of the threshold, believing that a single smart device on a front porch creates an impenetrable perimeter. This investigation brutally exposes the fatal flaw of relying on linear security. Every night at the same hour, the lights would dim and the electronic eyes would begin their vigil. The criminal element understands that homeowners focus their defensive budget on the primary entryway, leaving the rear and lateral access points severely underprotected. The physical evidence proves that a sophisticated predator will always seek the path of least resistance, exploiting the dark blind spots at the back of a property to launch a devastating internal ambush. This tactical reality shifts the paradigm of home defense from the front yard to the hidden corners of the backyard. Furthermore, we must analyze the critical forensic lesson regarding digital permanence. The alleged attacker operated under the outdated assumption that physical destruction of hardware equates to the elimination of evidence. But in the modern era of constant connectivity, data is volatile and asynchronous. The split-second fiber optic upload to a remote server occurs faster than human kinetic action. Smashing a lens or severing a power cable will not stop the packets of data that have already been transmitted to the cloud. The digital ghost recovered by federal agents is a stark warning to anyone attempting to manipulate a modern surveillance grid. To a seasoned predator, this was not a deterrent, but a schedule to be exploited. The hardware may be violently destroyed, but the residual memory is absolutely permanent. We must recognize that true security requires overlapping layers of physical and digital defense, acknowledging that our most severe vulnerabilities are often the doors we never think to watch. A heavy deadbolt on a front door provides absolutely no protection if the darkness has already been invited through the back patio. The terrifying reality of this investigation is that the victim did everything right according to the standard rules of suburban safety, yet her sanctuary was still methodically dismantled by an unseen threat. The forensic evidence has spoken clearly, dismantling the victim, blaming rumors, and revealing the cold mechanics of a calculated ambush. But the most chilling thought is that the architect of this nightmare is still walking, free, possessing the lethal knowledge of how to bypass our most trusted defenses. I want you to ask yourself a very serious question before you go to sleep tonight. The suspect allegedly understood that the most secure homes have the most predictable vulnerabilities. Have you truly secured every single entry point to your home, or are you only watching the front step while the shadows gather behind you? I am the host of Ellis Case Reports, and I deeply appreciate you demanding the truth. Please click the video currently displayed on your screen to delve into another classified file where digital evidence exposed a flawlessly executed deception. I will see you all back here at the forensic reporting desk for the next investigation. As she settled into her bed, the house became a fortress of silence, but it was a fortress with a fatal flaw. The very technology meant to keep the world out was about to be turned against her. By 10 o'clock, the lights were out and the suspected intruder was likely already moving through the shadows of the foothills. He was not a random wanderer, but a calculated entity who had studied the layout and the timing of this specific residence. The unease of that night does not come from a sudden noise or a broken window, but from the realization that while Nancy was following her peaceful nightly routine, someone else was following her every move from the darkness outside. Individual standing on a private porch with a handgun holster clearly visible against his dark clothing. The first indication that the fortress had been breached did not come from a siren or a scream, but from a missing presence. On Sunday morning, February 1st, Nancy Guthrie failed to log on for her scheduled online church service. For a woman of her unwavering faith, this was an immediate alarm for her family. When they arrived at the Catalina Foothills home expecting perhaps a minor medical emergency, they were met with a scene of absolute confusion. The house was unnaturally still, and the usual signs of a Sunday morning were entirely absent. Initially, the family reportedly believed that an ambulance had already arrived and taken her away because of the chaotic state of the entryway. But as they looked closer, the terrifying reality began to take shape. There were no paramedics, and there was no Nancy. The house had been physically disturbed in a way that suggested a sudden and violent interruption of her life. The front door was the focus of their immediate dread. This is the image the suspected intruder thought he had deleted the moment he reached up and manually disconnected the security camera. It stood as a silent witness to whatever had transpired in the early morning hours. Every room they checked confirmed the same chilling fact. She was gone, and she had not left willingly. The routine was not just broken. It had been shattered by a force that left no room for explanation. The incident was not a slow disappearance, but a surgical strike that left the family standing in a vacuum of information. As they contacted the Pima County Sheriff, the focus shifted to the physical threshold of the home, where the evidence of a struggle was about to be revealed. The ground beneath the front porch held the most devastating secret of the entire night. As investigators processed the scene, they discovered a dark stain on the concrete right at the base of the front door. Forensic DNA testing was fast-tracked, and the results confirmed the worst fears of the Guthrie family. The blood belonged to Nancy. This confirmed that a violent encounter had taken place at the very entrance she used every day. For weeks, the internet has been flooded with a persistent and damaging theory that an 80, but the reveal became even more shocking when investigators looked at the security camera housing. The Ring camera had been manually and forcefully disabled at 1:47 in the morning. This created a massive contradiction that the internet has struggled to reconcile. If the suspect attacked her at the front door, as the blood suggests, why was there no audible alarm or call for help recorded? The presence of her blood at the threshold is a physical reveal that proves she was bleeding before she ever left the property. It is a detail that suggests a high level of violence occurring right in the open, yet hidden by the darkness of the foothills. How could a struggle resulting in significant blood loss happen at the primary entrance without triggering the very security system designed to detect it? The sight of that blood stain remains the most visceral and haunting image of the file. It is a permanent mark of the moment her sanctuary was violated. Why was the blood there, and what does it tell us about the suspected intruder's true path into the house? 4-year-old woman simply opened her front door for a stranger in the dead of night. Please hit the like button if you are committed to following the forensic truth of this case wherever it leads. The task of piecing together the movements of a ghost fell to the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. Sheriff Chris Nanos officially confirmed that this was not a case of a woman opening her door to a stranger. It was a forced entry. The physical evidence at the scene indicated that the suspected predator had used calculated force to bypass the residential locks. While the suspect believed he had erased his image by pulling the camera wires, he made a fundamental error in his understanding of modern cloud technology. Federal investigators were able to recover what they call residual data from the back-end servers. This digital ghost allowed them to see what the suspect tried to hide. On February 10th, the FBI released the recovered image. A suspected male wearing a full face mask and significantly a handgun holster strapped to his side. This reveal changed the entire complexion of the investigation. We were no longer looking for a common thief, but a coordinated and armed kidnapper. But forensic evidence and federal reports tell a far more violent story of a forced entry and a calculated ambush. The investigation into the residual data proved that the suspect was on the porch at 1:47 precisely when the feed died. But the forensic team found something even more baffling when they mapped the interior of the home. Despite the blood at the front door and the damaged camera there, the physical locks on that specific door had been attacked from a direction that didn't match the exterior blood trail. The investigation was moving deeper into the digital and physical architecture of the home. They were looking for the exact point of failure in the security grid. They were analyzing timestamps against the physical movement of the masked man in the holster. The investigation revealed that while the suspect was focused on the front camera, the house was already compromised from a completely different angle that the family had not yet realized. Every piece of recovered data was building a profile of a predator who was far more familiar with the property than a stranger should ever be. If she never opened that door, how did a masked gunman vanish with her into the desert silence? The investigative focus suddenly shifted entirely away from the primary entryway as a deeply disturbing new piece of the puzzle emerged. On a national television broadcast, the daughter of the victim, Savannah Guthrie, shared a chilling detail that completely fractured the initial assumptions of the public. She revealed that when relatives finally gained access to the property, they made a horrifying discovery at the rear of the house. The back doors leading out to the patio were not just unlocked, they were propped wide open. This seemingly simple spatial anomaly creates a massive and terrifying contradiction in the physical evidence of the crime scene. We have a dark stain on the front porch, indicating a severe physical trauma, and a violently disabled piece of monitoring technology at that exact same location. Yet the rear of the residence was left gaping to the desert air. In the logic of a standard home invasion, a perpetrator typically creates a single point of breach and utilizes that same path for their escape to minimize exposure. But this specific arrangement of the entryways suggests a far more complex and sinister choreography. Welcome to Ellis Case Reports, where we strip away the social media speculation to examine the cold hard facts of the file. Why would a suspected attacker leave the back of the house completely exposed if the primary confrontation occurred on the front step? The presence of those propped open rear doors completely derails the viral internet theory that a trusting woman willingly unlatched her main gate for a stranger in the middle of the night. If she had simply answered a late knock, why would the back of her home be physically compromised in such a deliberate manner? Investigators realized that this was not a linear sequence of events. The physical architecture of the house was telling two completely different stories simultaneously. The front step spoke of a violent struggle and technological sabotage, while the rear patio whispered of a silent, unseen breach. This dichotomy forces law enforcement to rethink the entire trajectory of the intruder. A criminal mind sophisticated enough to target a specific residence in an affluent neighborhood would not accidentally leave multiple avenues of access unsecured unless those open paths served a very specific tactical purpose.